Cold War was not a war in the traditional sense. It was a prolonged state of geopolitical tension between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and their respective allies. Spanning from the end of World War II in 1945 to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, this conflict was characterized by ideological opposition, economic competition, military standoffs, and an ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. This script will explore the origins, key events, and lasting impacts of this extraordinary period in history. The seeds of the Cold War were sown during World War II. Although the United States and the Soviet Union were allies against Nazi Germany, their alliance was a marriage of convenience. Ideologically, they were polar opposites. The U.S. championed capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union adhered to communism and a centrally planned economy. The end of World War II left Europe in ruins, and the global balance of power in flux. The Yalta and Potsdam conferences in 1945 highlighted these tensions. Disagreements arose over the future of Eastern Europe, particularly Poland. The Soviet Union sought to establish communist regimes as a buffer zone against potential Western aggression, while the U.S. pushed for free elections and self-determination. Winston Churchill's 1946 speech famously described an iron curtain descending across Europe. In response, the United States adopted the Truman Doctrine in 1947, pledging to support countries resisting communism. This policy of containment became the cornerstone of the U.S. strategy. The Marshall Plan, introduced in 1948, was a U.S.-led initiative to rebuild war-torn Europe. By providing economic aid, the U.S. aimed to prevent the spread of communism. The Soviet Union, however, viewed this as an attempt to undermine its influence and refused to participate. In 1948, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, cutting off all supply routes. The U.S. and its allies responded with the Berlin airlift, delivering food and supplies by air for nearly a year. The blockade's failure marked an early Cold War victory for the West. The formation of NATO in 1949 and the Warsaw Pact in 1955 solidified the division of Europe. These military alliances underscored the growing polarization of the Cold War. The Cold War turned hot in Korea from 1950 to 1953. The conflict, began with North Korea's invasion of the South, was a proxy war between the U.S.-led United Nations forces and the Chinese-backed North Korea. The war ended in a stalemate, solidifying the division of the Korean Peninsula. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba prompted a U.S. naval blockade. After tense negotiations, the crisis was resolved with an agreement to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba. The Cold War extended into space, with both superpowers competing for technological supremacy. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in 1957. The U.S. responded by landing a man on the moon in 1969, a defining moment in the space race. The Cold War was also a battle for hearts and minds. Both sides used propaganda to promote their ideologies. Hollywood movies, literature, and music were tools of soft power in the West, while the Soviet Union utilized state-controlled media and art. The CIA and KGB engaged in extensive espionage activities. Spies infiltrated governments, stole technological secrets, and conducted covert operations, adding an air of intrigue to the Cold War. The 1970s saw a period of détente, with both sides seeking to reduce tensions. Treaties like SALT I and the Helsinki Accords aimed to limit the arms race and improve relations. However, these efforts were undermined by events like the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. President Ronald Reagan adopted a more confrontational approach in the 1980s. His Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, and increased military spending pressured the Soviet economy. Meanwhile, the Solidarity movement in Poland and other Eastern European uprisings weakened Soviet influence. Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, marked a dramatic shift. These reforms inadvertently accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War. The Cold War reshaped global politics. The United States emerged as the sole superpower, while the Soviet Union's dissolution led to the emergence of new independent states. Economically, former communist countries transitioned to market economies, often with great difficulty. The Cold War highlighted the dangers of ideological extremism and the importance of diplomacy. The arms race and proxy wars had devastating consequences, but the avoidance of direct conflict between the superpowers was a significant achievement. The Cold War's legacy persists. NATO remains a key player in global security, and tensions between the US and Russia echo Cold War dynamics. The period also left an indelible mark on culture, technology, and international relations. The Cold War was a conflict like no other. It was a war of ideas, influence, and intimidation, fought without direct confrontation. Its echoes continue to shape our world, reminding us of the thin line between peace and war. Understanding this period is crucial for navigating the complexities of today's geopolitics.